Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar focused on mental health. I'm Jennifer Hargrave. I'm the owner of Hargrave Family Law, and it is my privilege to welcome Ryan Waller today. I've had the privilege of knowing Ryan Waller for several years now. I met him first when he was a priest at our church and have gotten to know him. He's a fellow lawyer in the community and also a therapist, because you can't have too many licenses or degrees, right, Ryan?
Yeah, never enough. Just, my wife has a different answer to that, but
I bet she does.
yeah.
I will say that I have put the link to Ryan's website. So if you want to learn more about him or contact him after this, you can do that at his website. I've also put the link to my law firm and resources we have available at this time addressing the COVID-19 issue. But I want to roll right into the talk today, Ryan, because I know so many people right now are really dealing with feelings of grief and loss and depression, and I know you have written books on this topic and you deal with it every day. So I just want to start off and ask you to tell us a little bit about your journey to working and writing in the area of mental health.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's been a long and winding journey, as you sort of alluded to. I've done a few different things. I got really interested in mental health, I guess about 10 years ago now. The first job that I took out of seminary when I was finished with my theological education was working in a high school, a college prep school in Fort Worth, and I was a religion teacher. And I realized really quickly with working with those students that the questions that they had about God and about life and about where their lives were headed and the issues that they were facing were a lot more complex than I was really ready for or had anticipated. I thought as a religion teacher, they would just ask me questions about, like, why does the Bible say this, or why do Buddhists believe that? And really what they wanted to know was, does my life have any meaning? Why do I feel so uncomfortable in my own skin? I maybe think I'm depressed, but I don't really know. And I just realized with working with them that I had a real interest in not only what was going on spiritually in a person's life, but psychologically. And then just the longer that I worked with them too, and they were honest with me, because I think they sensed that I wasn't just a religion teacher, but I was someone who wanted to listen to them and cared about their lives. And they began to open up to me. I just began to sense, oh my goodness, there's a lot going on here that I'm completely, ill prepared to deal with. So you sort of take that snapshot in time and then you rush it forward. When I was working in the church as a priest, so often people would come and talk to me and they would express what was going on in their life. And I realized that a lot of what was being described to me sounded like either clinical depression or generalized anxiety disorder, or maybe a substance use disorder. And I would ask people, have you thought about seeing a counselor? Have you ever been in therapy? And oftentimes there was a real resistance to that. And they thought, no, that's therapy. Whoa, careful, or medication. Hey, now that's for other people. I just, why don't you just say a prayer for me and we'll just, this will all be good, right? Snap your fingers. And I really began to feel troubled by that. And I really began to see how pervasive a lot of these issues were, not only in faith communities, but it was all over the place. And so I got really interested in mental health. And I wanted to not just be a pastor that sort of talked about mental health, but I wanted to go and get the education and the training to become a mental health professional so I could not only understand these issues better, but I thought, you know what? I think there's a bridge that needs to be built between a lot of what happens in the psychological community and in faith communities. I think we have a lot we can learn from one another. And, just approaching humans in a very holistic manner requires us to take seriously every aspect of a human being's life, be it the emotional aspect, the spiritual aspect, the physical aspect, the psychological aspect. So I went and did that and became a therapist myself. And so I write and think about these sorts of things and enjoy working with people from that holistic approach. But what I just realized is that we all have mental health. Many of us face mental health challenges, and it wasn't helping anybody to pretend that this wasn't the case or isn't the case. And people are dying for this kind of information. They seem to want to talk about it more and more. We seem to be entering into a kind of a new phase of life where people are more open to talking about these sorts of things. And so I just enjoy being a part of that conversation.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really helpful. One of the areas I know that is really important to you and also important to just understand for all of us is the difference between mental health and mental illness. Can you describe to us the difference? And we just got feedback that you look tiny, and I don't want that to be the case. So I want to shift it around and see if we can get you to look a little bigger.
That's too big, y'all.
All right, well, let's try this again as we figure this out. Well, I've disappeared, so that's okay. But I'll go ahead and let you answer that, and I will play around with this and see if we can reconfigure.
Okay, I'll stare at myself and answer this question. Yeah, so you hear those two terms used interchangeably a lot these days, mental health and mental illness. And, you know, on one hand, I find that to be a helpful distinction, right? Because there is sort of a difference between someone who's been diagnosed with schizophrenia and suffers delusions of reference or has hallucinates or whatever it might be, and somebody who's not been diagnosed with schizophrenia, who can't even imagine what it's like to hear voices in their head or to watch a movie and think that the characters are all talking about them in some sense. So there really is, it can be helpful to delineate between someone who's actually suffering a mental illness and someone who is mentally healthy. On the other hand, though, it's a little confusing because, like all of health, it really all exists on a continuum, which is to say, where exactly do you draw the line to say, okay, well, the mentally ill are over here and the mentally healthy are over here? It seems to me a more honest representation to say, well, it's always in flux. And depending on what day it is, or even hour or season in a person's life, they might be more mentally healthy in one stage and be experiencing more mental illness in another stage. So it's not to say that this thing is static, but it's always really in motion. That being said, I'm not downplaying at all when we have a serious mental illness diagnosis. That's real, and that's a real thing. And there are some people who have certain illnesses and some people who do not have certain illnesses. But I think it would be more helpful for us all to think about this on a continuum. So, for instance, the way we think about mental health, so if we're going to parse these out and say, okay, so here's mental health, here's mental illness. Mental health essentially is the way that our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions affect our lives. Okay, so our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions, the way they affect our lives. So when a person is in a mentally healthy place, what that's going to allow them to do is they're going to have an accurate perception of themselves, which is hopefully going to lead to a positive self-esteem. They're going to be able to engage in meaningful relationships in their lives. They're going to be able to pursue the activities that they want to pursue without being impeded upon by their own sort of mood. And they're also going to be able to make healthy and good decisions. So in one sense, you can think about mental health as being the foundation of the rest of your health, right? Everything is going to spring forward from how mentally healthy you are. Because if your mental health is in good shape, then you're going to do all those things that I just described. You're going to feel good about yourself. You're going to go out into the world. You're going to do and pursue the things you want to pursue. You're going to be able to give of yourself and receive from others to have meaningful relationships. And you're going to be of sound mind to make good, healthy, and wise decisions for yourself. So we can think about that being sort of a very generic description of mental health. Mental illness, on the other hand, would be when your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions are being impeded upon. So what's happening there is there's a disruption in the foundation of your health. So now, instead of your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions helping you launch out into the world, they're holding you back. So your feelings or your thinking, right, will begin to warp your self-esteem. You're not feeling good about yourself. You're questioning everything you're doing, right? Your feelings, your mood might get depressed or overly elevated in such a way that it doesn't allow you to engage in deep and meaningful relationships with other people. You can see how this would just play itself all the way out. And then, of course, there are so many different mental illnesses we could talk about, and maybe we will a little bit later, how exactly that manifests in different people's lives. But the way to think about those kind of together again is to understand that mental health and mental illness involves the totality of the human being. So what we mean by that is, you probably all, if you remember back when you took your like Psych 101 course in college, right? You learned about the biopsychosocial approach to mental illness and mental health. Um, we shifted to that approach because as we kind of came into modernity, the brain disease model took over, right? We began to recognize that mental illness has a biological component to it. And this is really what our medical model is based upon, and how we operate, managed care in this country right now, is that we view mental illness as brain disorders or brain diseases. And while in one sense, that's absolutely true, right? There is no thought that we have that doesn't involve our brain. And so if something's gone awry, well, then our brain is involved. The issue with reducing mental illness, though, completely down to the brain disease kind of medical model is that it's too reductionist. So if we're honest with ourselves, we will recognize that we're more than just a brain. We're more than just this sort of operating system. Our lives are influenced not only by our biology, but our psychology, right? We are creatures that have thoughts about our thoughts. We're aware that we are thinking. And so the brain, that's how we think. But what we think about, how we think about it, what loops we get caught in, that's our psychology. So we have to factor in our psychology. And then we also know that that's still not enough. We all have our social lives. So we interact with other people constantly, or we used to before COVID-19 came and destroyed everything, right? And now we're all alone staring at screens. But we understand that our relationships dramatically affect everything that we're doing. So our social circumstances as well, depending on what kind of home you're raised in, what part of the city you're raised in, all those things, what socioeconomic group you belong to, which race you belong to, all of these things factor into a person's mental health or mental illness. And then also, I would add the spiritual realm. So for a lot of people, spirituality and or religion is a core part of their lives, and that's also going to affect. So yes, all that to say, just to sum that up, you've got mental health, you've got mental illness. They are related, they are connected. Sometimes we can easily kind of parse something out by saying this person over here is suffering from symptoms of bipolar disorder, and this person over here is not, right? That's a real thing. But it's more helpful for most of us to think of it on a continuum, sort of a sliding scale. And then overall, we want to think about the totality of these things from the biopsychosocial spiritual approach. That's a lot of information. Is that okay?
You now is like, I think it's normal for a lot of people to go around right now saying, I am really not feeling myself. Like, it's hard to get out of bed. It's hard to do the
Mhm.
routines. And, maybe I'm feeling depressed. Am I depressed? I don't know. So kind of with that context in the background, can you explain to us kind of what is depression? What is just a bad mood? I mean, how do we know when it's time to reach out and get help,
Mhm.
and what kind of help is available?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's a question I think a lot of people have. You can know that based on, like, if you just go to Google, right, and you start to type, am I depressed? It'll pop up really, really fast. Um, yeah, so everybody gets sad, right? Sadness is a part of life. In so many ways, and I think we're going to talk about grief a little bit later, but in so many ways, we're all sad to a certain extent right now based on what's happening in the world, right? It's normal. You turn on the TV or you look at the internet and you see how many people are sick, how many people are dying, how many people have lost their jobs, taken a pay cut. I saw this morning that 1 in 4 Americans have either lost their job or taken a pay reduction in the past few weeks. I mean, that's sad. I mean, that's, if you think about the way that that's playing out and affecting people's lives, that's a sad thing. We all get sad. Depression is not sadness, right? Depression is a tsunami of feelings that overwhelms the brain, that makes a person feel radically different than they felt prior to that moment in their lives, right? So depression, if we want to just get scientific about it, if you were going to be clinically diagnosed for depression, what's happening there is a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist is going to look at a cluster of symptoms. And what they're going to do is, by using the DSM-5, which is sort of like the Bible of psychiatry, that's how we diagnose, we're going to say, all right, I've got a list of symptoms here. And if this person is exhibiting 5 or more of these symptoms in the same 2-week period, then we're going to be thinking about depression. Okay. So depression is a mood disorder, essentially, that comes together, that disrupts a person's feelings, actions, thoughts, behavior in a way that is disturbing their typical pattern of life. And we need to see that happening for a stretch of at least 2 weeks. Okay. So in other words, so most people, if you kind of like think about your own life, if you think about the times you get sad, for anyone who's not experiencing depression, probably what you've experienced is an event, something's caused you to feel sad or kind of knocked you off your course, and then you probably rebounded pretty quickly. You might have felt down for a day, you might have felt down even for a couple of days, but after that, you probably experienced coming back online or feeling more like yourself. So that's not depression. What we're looking for in depression is this depressed mood, this feeling of, I don't know, I've lost interest in the things that I used to enjoy doing. I can't explain it. It's gone, right? There's nothing I can really kind of do about it. I've tried to ramp up that interest again. It's just not happening. We're looking for a lack of concentration. That's another big sign. This kind of inability to like even focus on things that are normally just enjoyable. So I'm not talking about just like an inability to focus on your work, but like people will describe not being able to watch their favorite TV show, just not caring about what's happening there, or to read a book. So kind of that inability. We're looking for disturbances in sleep. So either hypersomnia, someone who's all of a sudden sleeping a lot more than they normally would sleep, or insomnia, the inability to fall asleep, or waking up repeatedly through the night. There's a whole list there that we're looking for, but the main things we're looking for is that depressed mood and the loss of interest in the things that used to interest a person. And we're needing to see that sort of extend for about a 2-week period. That's when a clinician would be thinking about a diagnosis for depression versus just what we call reactive sadness, which is what we all experience. Something bad happens, you're sad about it. That's normal, not depression.
I know I'm experiencing it. I know others are too. There's lots of information out there, but is grief. And even though, I mean, I do know lots of people who have had significant losses during this time, loss of a loved one and loss of a loved pet. But I'm noticing even with just loss of normal routines and kind of, what we're accustomed to, that it's still like a low level of grief. I think I'm feeling, that loss. So talk to us a little bit about grief and what role that plays, and maybe talk about some things that we can do to help alleviate that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that. A week or so ago, there was an article in the Harvard Business Review. You may have seen it. It really kind of went viral, and I was so happy that it did. And the title of the article, I may not get this exactly right, but it said, the discomfort you're feeling is grief. And I thought this was really good to point out, because I think a lot of people right now during these times are wondering if they're depressed or not. I mean, maybe, right? But probably if you've been kind of functioning, healthy mentally prior to this virus, probably what you're experiencing from this is grief. And here's why. In the same way that we grieve when someone that we love dies, what most of us have had happen is our typical patterns of life were just abruptly stopped. They were just like a rug just pulled out from underneath us. Everything that we're used to doing, going to school, going to work, meeting up with friends to hang out, all seeing our family, all of these things where we derive joy out of life, we were told, yeah, you're not doing those anymore. Like, over, stop, right? And at the same time, there's actual real grief, like you said. People are dying, so people have lost loved ones, they've lost pets, they've lost all these things, and they don't know when they're going to come back. And so what this article pointed out was that the feelings that people cycle through in grief are a lot of what people are feeling right now. So think about, so everyone that's watching this, think about the way that you felt the past few weeks and ask yourself if you see yourself in these cycles. So we've all probably heard of the 5 stages of grief, right? That Elizabeth Kubler-Ross gave us. So in the first stage of grief is denial. We want to deny that the death has happened, right? I know for myself, when this first began, I thought, oh, can't be that big of a deal, right? Or it's a little blip or whatever it is. And even as it grew worse, I kind of kept trying to say, oh, no, it's not that bad. We push it away. It's something far away,
Yep.
or it can't, we keep denying. Some people still, they very much be in that place. You just don't want to deal with it. Wait, right? Yeah, you just don't want it. Well, once you realize that you kind of can't deny anymore, the next stage is anger, right? We get frustrated by the fact that this is happening. So now I'm saying, okay, I tried to push it away. I tried to pretend it wasn't happening. Well, darn it, it is happening. And I'm mad about it because I don't want this thing to be happening. I want to live my life. I don't want this to be disrupted, whatever. That's how I woke up this morning. And I found myself irritated by this whole thing, right? And that's another thing to point out. The stages of grief often do not operate linearly. So it's not like you just move through these. They're very circular. We go in and out of feeling one, we jump back, we regress, we progress. So today I found myself in the anger stage. I recognized that, and it was helpful for me to say, okay, I'm not depressed. That's why I'm not angry. I'm just in this stage right now of grief about this deal. So I'm angry, right? That's helpful. After anger, right, we start to bargain, right? We think, okay, what could I do, right, to change this? Or God, I promise if you'll just help us, get out of this, right? So we're bargaining on it. I'm sure some of you guys are probably doing that now, right? You want to bargain. Nothing you can do about it, right? Change that which is sort of outside of our purview of control, right? So we bargain. And then after that comes the sadness, right? Once we realize we can't exchange this in any way, we can't change it, we get sad, or we might even get depressed, right? So I'm sure you've had days where you wake up and you just feel lethargic about this whole thing. It just feels sad. If we can embrace the sadness, and this is important, we can hopefully find our way to acceptance. And what acceptance is, and a lot of people get confused on acceptance because they think it's sort of like this kind of laying down and not caring anymore, just then fine, whatever's going to happen happens, and what I do doesn't matter. That's not it at all. When we're talking about acceptance in the grief process, we're talking about the willingness to look reality in the eye and say, this is what it is. I wish it weren't this. If I could change it, I would, but I can't do that. So what I have to do is figure out a way to adapt and live within this because it's what I have, right? And so when you get to this place of acceptance, what it does is now it opens up new opportunities because I'm not denying it. I'm not angry about it. I'm not trying to bargain it away. I'm not putting my head in the sand and depressed. I'm looking at it, and it frees up my mind again to think creatively about the space that I'm in. Now, what's really cool is that in this article, and I can't remember the author's name, the author described he had worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and they had both talked about adding a sixth layer or sixth stage to the grief process, which is meaning, right? Adding meaning. So for a lot of people, say, okay, I want to get to that place of acceptance. I want to find the way that I can continue to live and live abundantly, but I want all this to mean something. And I think that's right on, because I think human beings, we can find a great deal of peace and satisfaction in meaning. We are meaning makers. We all, inherently want to find meaning in our lives. And so you see that right now with what a lot of people are doing creatively, I think, on the internet, the way that we're trying to like cheer one another up, the way we're trying to solve these problems. People are looking to say, okay, this doesn't just have to be a bad thing that happened. It is that. It is sad. It is a bad thing. But what is it that we can do in this moment to make our own lives and the lives of those around us have deeper meaning? How can we elevate kind of human consciousness? And that's sort of the place we would hope to get to. The reason I think this is important is because I find it helpful to identify which stage I feel like I'm in on that day. And by identifying it, by taking that internal feeling and just externalizing it, it actually makes me feel better. And it also makes me feel kind of like less crazy, because I think, okay, yeah, I feel down about this today. Well, that's fine. I've just circled back to sadness. That doesn't mean that tomorrow, right, I might not wake up and be primed and ready to jump into meaning making and find some meaning in all of this. You're allowing yourself to be human and recognizing that this pattern is universal to humanity.
That sixth
and
level. In your experience, this is something you pointed out, the fact this isn't linear. And it's not necessarily circular either, right? I mean, it just kind of happens in waves, and you got to ride whatever the wave is that you're feeling in the moment, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And be honest about it. I think that's, so when you ask like, what can we do, about it? How do we, I guess, cope with this? That's the first step. Being honest with yourself about how you feel during this, because trying to shove that down, it's not going to do you any good. And in fact, that's something that's really common to a lot of mental health challenges. We end up having them because instead of taking the emotion that we're feeling and actually allowing ourselves to feel it and to talk about it and to explore it, we just shove it down. We just push it down, we push it down, we push it down. And the problem with doing that is we can only do that for so long. Now, some people have more capacity to do that. They can do it for a longer period of time. But if you take all of your uncomfortable emotions and you never look at them, you never do anything with them, and you just shove them down deep inside of you, at some point, might not be today, might not be tomorrow, for some people, it might not be 15 years, it is going to boil up and it is going to come out in an unhealthy way. And that very well may be that it's going to come out in some form of mental health challenge for you, or a relationship struggle, or whatever it is. So the first thing we can do is just be honest about how we're feeling. Not pretend it's not there, not shove it down, say, this is what I'm feeling. Because if you can do that, it's not only going to have just a healthy, cathartic experience to it, it's going to allow you to think about what you need. Because what I need on a day where I'm really feeling anxious is very different than what I need on a day where I'm really feeling angry about the situation. And what I need when I'm denying something is different than what I need when I'm feeling depressed. So it puts you in these different categories, and then you can think about what is it that I need? Because that's the next question. So what do I do with this, right? And it's going to depend on, well, what kind of emotion are you experiencing? It's not a catch-all.
I do think you were talking earlier about mental health,
and everybody's going to be different.
It occurred to me that there's so much information about physical health. We have a lot of
That's going to be unique to
knowledge about
different
how to keep
individuals.
ourselves healthy, the exercise and eating well and making sure we get sleep. But we don't necessarily have the prescription for mental health. And that isn't something that we have typically discussed as readily as we discuss our physical health. What kind of things should we be doing to keep ourselves mentally healthy?
Yeah. 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 It's a great question. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, for starters, what I tell people is if they already
Mm-hmm.
have some kind of regiment that they've had in place, don't stop that. So what I mean by that is if you're on any kind of mental health medication, keep taking it. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. If you regularly see a therapist or you go to support groups, you need to keep doing that. This is not the time to push pause and to say, I can't do that because my world has been thrown into. No, no, no. You've got to find a way. In the same way that even though things are crazy right now, we make time to get food into our bodies. You've got to continue to care for your mental health. And so if that means if you go to support groups and they're not meeting, find one that's online. There are lots of them, right? If you see your therapist, keep seeing your therapist. I'm doing appointments in my office still, and just like this with a lot of people, telehealth. Most therapists are doing it. Keep doing what you're doing. For those if you don't have that, or if maybe you haven't needed that, maybe you're not in a situation where you've got a struggle and you're not on medication, maybe you're not in regular therapy. What we need to do is keep good mental health hygiene. So, right now, being shut in for a lot of people is really difficult because what we're used to doing is getting up, getting ready for the day, and getting out of the house. So, if you're not doing that, if your job is keeping you home, you need to try and establish some kind of routine and rhythm that is similar to what you did in the past. So, get up at the same time that you got up in the past. Go ahead and get dressed for the day if you can. Not to say you've got to put on full kind of business attire, but just changing out of your sweatpants and putting on regular clothes, brushing your teeth is going to click in your brain that, okay, it's time to start this day. So you're demarcating, I've been sleeping, I've had my rest. Now it's time to do something productive. It gets the body going, right? Maybe you've got a better shot at sort of being productive. The next thing, though, that I would say to that is most of the people that I'm talking to are struggling with their work product during this time. So they're saying, look, I'm trying to
I
work,
happen to have a
but it's
dog
tough
that
when
licks
there's
my elbow
children in
when
the
I'm trying to
home
type.
and I hear them playing, or, I can't stop reading the bad, news article, whatever. Definitely. Oh, I love it. Yeah, yeah. It's good. Um, we've got to be really compassionate with ourselves during this. I bet a lot of you have seen that the kind of the quote or whatever it is that's going around the internet that says like none of us are like working from home. We're like at home during a crisis, like trying to get some work done. I think that's far more accurate. Like, this is our very first pandemic, right? We've never done this before. Nobody has, right? Um, so you've got to be kind to yourself. Say, look, I'm going to try and be productive. I'm going to do what I need to do, but at the same time, I'm going to recognize that this is tough, and that there's a reason why we don't typically do it this way. It's not as efficient. Probably not going to do my best work, and that's okay because I'm a human being, and this is tough. So you want to find the rhythm. You want to get to work, but you also want to be very forgiving with yourself. The other thing I would mention is that we are not designed to live in isolation, right? Human beings, we are relational creatures, and we know this because ancient literature and art, we've been talking about it for as long as humans have been expressing ideas. And we also know through the theory of attachment that from our earliest moments, the way that babies attach to their caregivers has a lot to do with the outcomes that they experience in their lives. We are designed to live in community with one another. So during this strange time when we're really cut off from each other, especially if you live alone and now you're alone for the vast majority of your day, we have to find other ways to connect with one another. So taking the time to pick up the phone and to call a friend and have a meaningful conversation, participating in webinars, things like this, getting plugged in, uh, signing up for anything that you can where human beings are talking with one another and connecting is really, really good. Especially if you're listening to this right now and you struggle with depression, you probably know that oftentimes, because depression is so smart, it tells us that we should isolate when we feel bad, right? It tells us to do the exact opposite of what we really need to do. So it says, go away, don't reach out, don't open yourself out, just stay closed off. And then we do that, we listen, and all that happens is our depression gets worse. So if you're feeling that temptation to sort of just shut down and stay to yourself, resist that as much as you can, fight back against that, and connect socially in whatever way that you can
Talking
right
about
now.
being
And I understand a
quarantined with
lot of
other
that's going to be
people,
through
or just
technology
looking out
because we
for
simply
other
can't
people that we know
gather
are
together.
alone. What are
But if you're
some
in a home
signs we
with other
should look
people
for in
that you're
somebody else who
quarantining
might
with,
be really
yeah,
struggling with
don't
depression and
close
feeling
yourself
like they're
off
getting
emotionally.
pulled
Stay open.
under? And how can we help them while we're quarantined?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, what's interesting about the those diagnostic criteria that I was talking about earlier for depression, um, it doesn't have to be self-reported, right? So even the DSM gives the opportunity for some of these symptoms to be observed by other people. So this is a really good question. If you're noticing a loved one that has a serious alteration in their kind of typical character, so if someone is normally really boisterous or the life of the party and they're getting really, really quiet, something to notice. If someone drops the things that they're interested in, I mean, right now, no one's going out really doing their hobbies. But if there are things like listening to music or playing music that they typically do, and then all of a sudden not doing that, that's something to pay attention to. We're just looking for deviations from what we know to be normal or typical of their behavior. And what I always tell people is don't be afraid to ask. You always want to just be brave enough to say, "Hey, are you feeling okay? I've noticed a change. Are you feeling like yourself? Are you feeling depressed?" Oftentimes, people dance around that question, and we really ought not to.
That's really helpful.
If someone is
I
depressed and you
also,
ask, you're
Ryan, I
not
would
going to
like for you
offend
just to
them. You're
touch
not going to plant the idea of
on
depression in their
your
mind. They're
kind
going
of
to be
that
grateful
unique
that you've
perspective
taken the
that you do
time to
bring into
notice
these
and to care.
situations with mental health,
So if
and
you
that's your
sense anything, just
spiritual
ask.
life and your theological training, and just sort of touch with us how faith can have an impact on mental health. I know sometimes there's that tension between church and mental health, or there has been in the past about, you know, yeah, are we breaking up? Can you hear me? Can you?
Hey,
Okay. Can you hear? I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the question in the chat.
hey, Jennifer, you.
Yeah.
No, you're breaking up pretty good.
So can you hear? Just go ahead and tell us how. Okay.
Okay, and I think it has to do with mental health and faith or theology. Okay, yeah. Write down, maybe I'll get it, but I can't hear you. Okay, I'll just go. I think I heard a good bit of that. Is how does our faith or theology inform this? For me, at least, in my bias, I come from the Christian tradition. There is this theme of hope that we get in our faith, and the idea is that God is always at work, right? God is not finished doing the kind of work of creating. And so no matter what we experience or what we see that could look potentially hopeless, this idea that we're moving towards something that could be whole um, is really helpful for me because, and I didn't think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm part of my own journey into being interested in mental health and mental illness is my own struggles. And so I've struggled mightily with depression and anxiety myself and totally identify as a co-sufferer, right, in this realm. And so I know firsthand what it's like to feel despair, to feel like the feeling that I have with anxiety or depression is a feeling that I'm going to have forever. That's one of the hallmarks of depression that makes it so different than other kind of physical ailments like a broken arm, where the doctor can give me a clear timeline of how quickly my arm should heal. The difficulty with depression is that it feels like it'll never end when you're in it. And this is something you hear people describe over and over again, is that if they could just have a timeline, if you could just tell me when these symptoms are going to get better, I would be able to cope and handle this more easily, which is really similar to what a lot of us are struggling with this virus, is that the uncertainty of how long this is going to go on is a big part of our trouble. If we just knew, if you gave me a date, right, when we were going to resume our normal lives, it would become more manageable. And so with mental health challenges, this feeling that it's never going to end can really get a person down. This is what often times we have in folks who complete suicide, is they become convinced that the pain that they're in today and they were in yesterday is going to be the exact same pain as tomorrow. In fact, it's probably going to be worse and it's never going to get any better. And we believe this to the point where we become completely hopeless. So, at least for me, from the Christian perspective, this idea, this belief that no, 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 I don't know the future. I don't know what this is going to look like, but I believe that there's a God who is working for the good of all of humanity, for all of creation. Doesn't promise to take away this suffering, doesn't promise to snap God's fingers and fix things, but promises to stay in it, be in it, and is moving us toward a place of healing and restoration, is an idea and a belief that I can hang my hat on that gives me infinite amounts of hope. And so I would encourage all people to find whatever spiritual experience is going to offer them some of those same resources. It might not be in a traditional religious setting. It might be in the way that you experience nature. It might be in the way that you experience music or some other art form. But to find those moments of majesty and marvel and wonder that are really transcendent is really important for the human experience, finding meaning and holding on to hope. You know, in the Jewish tradition, they often say that there's only one unforgivable sin, and that's the sin of despair. The sin of saying, I know that it's not going to get any better, and thus I can make a decision from that place. Mental illness wants you to get to that place of despair and operate from that perspective. What I would say is don't do that. Never give up hope. It can always get better. And especially with depression and anxiety, and really almost every form of mental illness, these are
I love that message.
difficult
We have a question,
diagnoses.
and
These
by
are
the way, we would
difficult
love to take
conditions, but they're
questions
also
from
highly treatable.
anyone else who wants to
We
ask.
have
So you can type it
lots
in
of
the chat, or you
modalities,
can
lots
type
of
it down
therapies,
below in the
lots of
questions. But
medications
Ian asks, how do
that
you
do a lot of
respond
good.
when you can
And
see that
so
someone is struggling,
don't give
but
up.
they
Don't give
say
up.
they
Don't
are
ever give up.
fine?
Oh yeah. Keep asking. Keep asking. Um, that's a really good question. You know, we're all trained to be so polite. And if we ask someone if they need our help and they tell us no, or they tell us they're fine, then it's our job to sort of respect their autonomy and not ask again because that could be perceived as being rude, right? Yeah, maybe under normal circumstances, perhaps. But if you're worried that someone's depressed, someone that you care about, never stop asking. Keep asking, because for all you know, they could be in denial themselves. But your asking is reminding them
And
that
experienced is that when
no,
somebody is
what's going
struggling
on inside them
with
is actually
depression,
being
um,
externalized to the point
it
that
can
other people are
feel
noticing,
like,
and that might help them to
I'm
come to
responsible for
terms
that. Like, well, I'm not
with
doing
acknowledging the
enough or
reality
being
of
enough,
what's
and I
going on.
feel really
Um,
helpless in
but
loving somebody
yeah,
who's struggling with
I would just
depression.
say don't stop asking.
What do you
Don't
say
stop
for
asking.
somebody who is in that close relationship and it feels like failure? It feels like, why can't my love rescue this person? Why can't I give them hope?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that's a very common experience. Your loved one doesn't need you to be anything else but their loved one. So what they need you to do is to be present with them, to ask them if they're okay, and for you to always be available to listen, and to listen non-judgmentally. And here's the thing. So many of us get scared in this situation because we do think, oh my gosh, um, why am I not enough? Or I should know what to say, or I should know what to do. No, 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 no. We don't think this way when someone breaks their leg, right? Or our loved one has a cholesterol problem, right? We tell them, look, you probably need to talk to someone. You need to go to the professional. That's the person that can help you. But you don't feel this like onus to do it yourself. It's the same thing here. You just need to be available to let the person know that they are not alone. And the only thing you've ever got to be able to say, and everybody can do this, is you can say, you know, I think that if you maybe talk to a professional, they could probably help. That's all you ever have to say. So no matter what eventually comes out of them, no matter how dark whatever it is that they've got going on is, you don't have to have the answers. You don't have the answers. But there are people out there who do. So your loved one is not going to need any kind of skill set that you're trying to manufacture,
Listen, you
any
have
kind
a
of
book that's
magic
about to come
words.
out. Why don't you tell us a little bit
All
about
they
that?
need is your open ear, your open heart, and your ability to sit there and listen to them and not respond judgmentally. Just respond with an openness, with the love and the recommendation that they seek some help with the professional. That's all you got to do. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've got a book. It'll be out in January of 2021. And it's called Depression, Anxiety, and Other Things We Don't Want to Talk About. And it delves into some of what we've been talking about here today. It's published by Thomas Nelson, which is the Christian imprint of HarperCollins, and so it is directed toward a Christian audience. But it's probably helpful for anyone if you're just interested in a little more on how we can help destigmatize the conversation around mental health. So it deals with some of these general, what is mental health, what is mental illness, what we're talking about today, and how can we do a better job of talking about this and caring for people in the church in particular. Faith communities have not always been fantastic on this particular issue. And so the hope of the book is that it just continues to spur the kinds of conversations that you've allowed us to have today here, Jennifer. I would so appreciate this. This is what those of us who are talking about this, sort of the public forum, are trying to do, is to bring this conversation out into the light from the dark, because we believe that just in doing that, writing more books about it, talking about it, are going to help people to feel inspired and to feel brave enough to go and find the help that they need. This is a conversation that does nobody any good if we refuse to have it. 1 in 4 Americans every single year are going to face some kind of mental health struggle.
Wow.
We've got depression and anxiety at all-time highs. We've got a suicide rate that's never been higher and has only been increasing. I just saw actually this morning that one of the national hotlines for mental health is received an 891% increase of calls from what was happening this time last year. So we know that yeah, can you believe that? 891%. So we know that what's happening in the world right now too is going to have some fallout. And so carrying on these conversations is a way that we can help those who need help to go and get it. And that's why I share my own story in the book, some of the struggles that I've had with depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, all kinds of things. Because the more of us that stand up and say, yeah, this has affected me, and here's how, and here's what I did, and here's what I continue to do to try and stay healthy, it normalizes these conditions, which for so long have been burdened by a lot of shame. And it just ought not to be the case.
So why don't you just talk about that a little bit?
I want to see, and a lot of other people want to see, people get better, not worse. And so, yeah, so I write about that in the book to go back to that. Yeah, so that'll be January 2021 if I guess if the world still exists, right? Yeah, yeah, I do. It's a Christian group. It's called Christians in Mental Health, and it's on Facebook, and try to post good resources there as much as I can. I write on Instagram too sometimes, and my own personal account on Facebook. And then I'm just in private practice here in Dallas. I'm at Southwest Clinical and Forensics. So
that's awesome. We have one more question from Margaret.
I do individual psychotherapy, and I do couples work, and I even work with some young children.
Who's been diagnosed as bipolar,
doing that work day in and day out.
That diagnosis.
But yeah, so you can, if you've got other questions or you want more resources, you can find me at the website that Jennifer posted.
Or shame in general.
You can find me on any of those social media accounts, or you can email me at Ryan at ryancaseywaller.com.
I was just saying,
I'd be happy to help in any way.
Not just with bipolar, but with other mental health issues as well.
Yeah, with bipolar. Yeah. Say that again. Yeah, I'll tell you the one that's a really cool little read, and it's not specific to bipolar, but it's someone who is seriously ill. Is a book called it's not Notes on the Nervous Planet, but it's called I'm forgetting the name of it. It's written by a guy named Matt Haig, Matthaig. Let me look on my phone really quick. And it blew up this past year because it's one of the best books I've read on normalizing the struggle. Reasons to Stay Alive. That's it. Reasons to Stay Alive. This guy, Matt Haig, he's from Great Britain. He's a fantastic writer. He's written a bunch of novels and some nonfiction work. But he wrote this little book, and it details his own journey through being suicidal, all the way to where he is now. And it is so creative, and it's yeah. Oh, yeah, Jimmy, it's called Reasons to Stay Alive by Matt Haig. And I was saying it really normalizes the struggle of mental illness. And it's one of those books that I find myself returning to. I probably read like a little snippet out of it almost every day or every other day, because it is fantastic at alleviating the shame
That's great.
that
We have
whoever this
a few
person
more
is
minutes
that's
and a couple more
feeling.
questions. So I'm going to go ahead and throw them at you.
Mental illness is
Ian
not
says, I've
a
been
result
hurt
of a
before
character
by people I
defect. It's
trusted in
not the
church.
result of
Where do I
sin.
start to
It's
find
not the
someone that I
result of
can
bad
trust when I'm
decisions that
afraid
you've
of being hurt
made. It
again?
just
I know
is
trust is a
what it
big
is.
issue
And
for a
this
lot of
book does
people.
such a lovely
So
job
what do you
of
suggest
hammering
in
that,
building trust
home.
relationships?
So
How do we know who to trust?
yeah, that's a tough one, right? Because you don't know that you can trust someone really until you're vulnerable with them and they are able to receive you and not hurt you. And so, obviously, I don't know what this situation is, but if you're a Christian for long enough, at some point, someone in the church is going to hurt you, right? Because all of us Christians are doing our
Mhm.
best, following after Jesus, but none of us are Jesus. And so we're imperfect, and the church is knee deep in sin. It always has been. And so that's tough. But the wounds that can happen in church seem to cut deeper than other wounds because oftentimes it feels as though whoever wounds us in church, it kind of feels like God has wounded us. And so there's some work to be done there. You got to kind of keep clear, like, it's not God who did it, right? It's an imperfect person who's following after God. But I don't know if the wounding was a result of something that went on with mental illness. That's been the case of a lot of people that I've talked to. They've spoken up about their condition and they were either told that's not a real thing, or that means you've got some kind of unconfessed sin in your life, or it's totally a spiritual issue. It's been over spiritualized and their illness hasn't been taken seriously. The only thing I can tell you is that you want to use wisdom, but I similar to what I said earlier. I would say don't give up. I would say don't give up on the church, and don't think that there aren't people within the church whom you can trust just because there were some people that you couldn't trust. Um, I think part of being a Christian is keeping that hope and that God is still at work, and God wants you to be able to find a place in the church where you can really be vulnerable and be able to place your trust in the lives of or in the hands of some other people. So I'd say keep trying, but the scary part about that is you there is no way to know unless you're vulnerable. But you don't have to take unnecessary risks, especially with mental illness. Not everybody can handle these sorts of issues, and that's just a sad kind of reality. That there are
Absolutely.
some people
And
who aren't just going to
all
get
right,
there
we're
with
going to
you,
shoot real
and they're
quick.
not going to
Ryan asked,
understand.
what's the best way to
And
approach a
so you
manic
do want to be
bipolar
careful
diagnosed person
about who you
who has a
tell and how
cyclical
you
history of
tell.
taking their meds until they feel
Oh, I
better?
wish I had a better
But
answer
because
to
they
that. I
feel
feel like
better, they don't
I'm
need the
kind of
meds.
failing,
And
but
then
my
is
hope
there
and
a better
prayer
way
would be
to
that you could
approach it
find some
besides,
people
are you
that
still
are
taking
that
your
are worthy
meds? I know
of
that's
your
a
trust.
common issue in families dealing with bipolar.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really common issue, especially with bipolar. Um, yeah, no, a lot of people stop taking their meds because right they feel better, and some legitimately just forget. That's an issue with bipolar. Um, if that's the case, and I don't know if it is, if you're living in the same household, I've got several clients for whom they have to be really methodical about how the medication is laid out and where it's laid out in the house and where it's put in the order. So some people use those Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, like whatever, where they put the pills, and there's a system to it. So if it's someone who's kind of in your care and they're tired of you asking them and you don't want to have to ask them, have a system where you can see it. And so you know that they're going to come across their medication in the regular course of their morning and their evening. And it's a way, if you're needing to monitor it, then you can see it as well, whether they've done it or whether they haven't done it. And then you can approach it. But also, it's so important that the person that has bipolar stays on that medication. Um, that, yeah, asking
And
might be kind of a
thank you,
burden
Ryan. We
on
are
both
at
of
the
you,
top of the hour, and I want to thank
but
all of
it's
you for
just the
your great
burden
questions
that
and your
is what it
participation.
is.
You're going to get a copy of
That's
the
that's part of
webinar.
that
You're
particular
going to get an
disease.
email.
And
Feel free to share
asking
it.
is
Please
uber
invite others
important
to
because,
watch as
as you
well.
know,
I
the
think this
cyclical
is so
pattern has been that
important
they've
that we
come
just
off.
support each other. And I
Things then
thank
don't
you,
typically
Ryan,
go
for
well
taking
when they
time
do.
today to be with
So
us.
that's a tough one.
So thank you all very much.
That's a tough one.
Bye.
Okay. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Bye.